let's talk about numbers that shouldn't exist. Between November 1942 and May 1943, the 8th Air Force was losing bombers at a rate that's almost impossible to imagine. A B-17 crew had, on average, about a 1 in 4 chance of completing their full 25-mission tour. Not odds, a coin flip with your life. Except the coin was rigged against you. By early 1943, the average bomber crew based in England could expect to survive just 15 missions. 15. Not even halfway through the tour, and most crews didn't make it. Now picture a crew that defied those odds so thoroughly it became almost unthinkable. The Memphis Belle and her crew flew 38 combat missions over occupied Europe and returned every single time. All 10 men alive. No deaths. No one lost to fighters, flak, mechanical failures, or the countless other ways crews vanished in the skies over Germany. To put that in perspective, during the same months the Belle was flying, the 8th Air Force was losing roughly 40 bombers per major raid. 400 men gone in a single afternoon. The 91st Bomb Group, which the Memphis Belle belonged to, earned the grim nickname the Ragged Irregulars, thanks to the brutal losses they suffered early in the war. In one mission to St. Nazaire in November 1942, the 91st lost 4 of 12 aircraft, 37 men dead or captured in a single day. And yet, there was Captain Robert Morgan's crew. Mission after mission, they returned with their plane riddled with holes, but every man on board still breathing. Even Pentagon statisticians scratched their heads when they crunched the numbers. Factoring flak density over places like Wilhelmshaven or fighter concentrations across the Ruhr Valley. The Memphis Belle's survival rate defied every model they had. What makes it even more astonishing? These weren't easy runs. Morgan's crew wasn't picking soft targets in lightly defended areas of France. They were hitting submarine pens at St. Nazaire, aircraft factories at Bremen, ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, missions where the Luftwaffe threw everything they had. Experienced German pilots in FW-190s and Bf-109s knew exactly where a B-17's blind spots were, exactly how much punishment the bomber could take before breaking apart. And the physics themselves were against you. Flying a B-17 over Germany in 1943 meant sitting in a fragile aluminum tube at 25,000 feet, carrying 2,500 gallons of high-octane fuel and tons of explosives. With the temperature outside around 40 degrees below zero, around you German 80mm flak shells were exploding, ripping through the sky. Survival seemed impossible, and yet somehow, the Memphis Belle's crew made it through, again and again. Every explosion sent shards of metal flying in a 75-foot radius. One fragment, no bigger than your thumb, could tear through aluminum skin, cut a hydraulic line, rip open a fuel tank, or knock off a control surface. And these bombers weren't flying solo. They were packed tight in formation, shoulder to shoulder. One B-17 going up could take 2 or 3 others with it. Yet Morgan's crew survived this nightmare 38 times. Every mission, the Memphis Belle would roll back onto the tarmac at Bassingbourn, engines still hot, and all 10 men would climb out, alive. Ground crews started whispering about luck, or maybe something more, treating the Belle like she was blessed. Pilots from other planes would touch her for good fortune before heading out. The airplane became more than just metal and engines. Before the War Department, before Hollywood, before the Bond tours, she was proof that survival was possible, that skill, courage, and maybe just a sliver of luck could defy statistics designed to bury you. Robert Morgan wasn't destined to make history. Born in 1918 in Asheville, North Carolina, he was just 23 when he began flying combat missions over Europe. His father ran a small, unremarkable business, and Morgan grew up during the Depression like every kid of his era. But he had one obsession: flying. At 14, he'd ride his bicycle to the local airfield and hang around until someone let him sit in a cockpit. By 16, he was scraping together money from washing cars and odd jobs for flying lessons. He soloed before he could even drive. By the time he enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1940, he already had more flight hours than some of his instructors. The military wasn't built for pilots who showed up already knowing how to fly. and Morgan tore through primary, advanced, and multi-engine transition training like it was nothing. By early 1942, he had his wings, just as the Air Corps desperately needed experienced pilots for the new B-17 units heading to England. And that's where Morgan's leadership began to take shape. And it wasn't by the book. The military taught rigid hierarchy, clear commands, unquestioned orders. Morgan saw a different story. These weren't seasoned soldiers, they were kids. His bombardier, Vince Evans, was 21. His navigator, Chuck Layton, only 22. And Morgan treated them not as subordinates, but as people he could trust to survive with him. The waist gunners were barely out of their teens. Morgan made a choice that probably saved their lives. He tossed out half the rules about rigid crew discipline and started treating his men like partners instead of subordinates. He held crew meetings where everyone had a voice. If the tail gunner worried about attacks from 6 o'clock, Morgan listened. If the engineer noticed the number 3 engine running rough, that became a priority discussion. This wasn't normal. Most B-17 commanders ran crews with an iron fist, because that's how the Army taught it. The pilot gives orders, everyone obeys. Morgan built something different, a trust-based team. Every man knew Morgan valued their survival as much as completing the mission. That trust changed everything once they were under fire. The Memphis Belle herself came off Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle in September 1942. She was a standard B-17F, serial number 412485, painted in olive drab and gray. Nothing unique about her construction. The same engines, the same .50 caliber guns, the same Norden bomb sight as hundreds of other B-17s. Morgan named her after his girlfriend back in Memphis, Tennessee, Margaret Polk. A commercial artist painted a pin-up girl on the fuselage, a common tradition. Hundreds of bombers had nose art. But with Morgan at the controls, this plane became extraordinary. Morgan's approach to assembling his crew was just as unconventional. He handpicked men based on character, not just paperwork. He wanted people who could think clearly under pressure, who wouldn't freeze when a Focke-Wulf came screaming through the formation with guns blazing. His co-pilot, Jim Vinus, was steady as a rock, capable of flying the bomber home if Morgan went down. Staff Sergeant Harold Lockhack, the top turret gunner and flight engineer, could tear down and rebuild an engine blindfolded. Morgan wasn't just assigning roles. He was building a survival machine, one man at a time. The Memphis Belle touched down at Bassingbourn Airfield in England on September 30th, 1942. Morgan's crew had just 6 weeks to understand what combat really meant. No amount of training back home could prepare them for German flak and fighters. You could practice formation flying over Nevada until it was second nature, but nothing simulates a plane exploding 300 feet off your wing while metal rains down, wondering if a fragment is about to take your tail off. Their first mission came on November 7, 1942. The target was the submarine pens at Brest, France. The 8th Air Force was still learning the brutal reality of daylight precision bombing. Theories developed in Alabama rarely survived first contact with the Luftwaffe. Morgan's crew joined a formation of 31 B-17s, and the moment they crossed the French coast, the flak began. Black puffs of 80mm shells appeared around the formation, like someone throwing ink into the sky. Each puff represented a shell that could tear a B-17 in half. Inside the bomber, the noise was deafening. Engines roared, guns rattled, wind screamed through every gap in the aluminum skin, and nearby flak bursts slammed into the fuselage like a sledgehammer. Morgan learned a lesson that would define the next 37 missions. When German fighters attacked, the instinct to break formation was deadly. Stragglers got hunted, damaged planes got torn apart. So Morgan made a rule that went against every natural impulse. Stay in formation no matter what. Even with fighters bearing down, even through flak, tight formation was survival. The learning curve was brutal. On their third mission, November 23, 1942, the crew flew to Saint-Nazaire, and the 91st Bomb Group was decimated. German fighters struck in waves. Morgan watched B-17s spiral down in flames. One plane took a direct flak hit and disintegrated in an instant, aluminum pieces tumbling across the sky. 10 men aboard gone before they could even bail out. Another bomber, hit by fighter cannon fire, fell from formation with engines ablaze. Morgan's ball turret gunner, Tony Nastel, saw the crew parachute one by one into the winter sky over France. Prisoners if lucky, dead if not. And yet, the Memphis Belle came home. Holes riddled the wings, a few hydraulic lines were shredded, one engine ran rough, but all 10 men survived. Ground crews counted 18 flak holes in the fuselage and wings, 18 shots that could have hit vital controls, fuel lines, or crew members, and didn't. Morgan didn't chalk it up to luck. He called it flying the aircraft properly, holding formation, keeping a steady hand, and denying the Germans easy targets. By December 1942, the crew had developed a chemistry that would keep them alive. Every man knew his role by instinct, even when freezing and exhausted. Navigator Chuck Layton plotted courses that minimized exposure over the heaviest defenses. Bombardier Vince Evans became accurate enough to hit targets on the first pass, reducing time in the kill zone. The gunners, stationed around the plane's 50 caliber guns, learned to coordinate fire, conserve ammo, and call out threats calmly. Even as Messerschmitts dived in with guns blazing, each mission sharpened their instincts. They learned which Luftwaffe maneuvers were feints, which flak bursts meant danger, and when the bombardier was about to open the bomb bay doors so they could brace for sudden drag and vulnerability. January 27, 1943, would test them like never before. The target, Wilhelmshaven, Germany's major naval base on the North Sea. This was the 8th Air Force's first large-scale raid straight into the heart of German airspace, and Morgan's crew was ready to see what maximum effort really meant. That morning, 53 B-17s and 41 B-24 Liberators took off into the gray European sky, and the Luftwaffe was waiting. German radar had tracked them the moment they crossed the coast, and fighter controllers vectored every available Bf-109 and FW-190 to intercept. Morgan watched contrails forming high above the bomber stream as the German fighters got into position, ready to dive. By now, the Luftwaffe had perfected their tactics. Head-on attacks gave B-17 gunners the least time to react, so fighters climbed above the formation, rolled over, and plunged straight through from 12 o'clock high. Closing speed, over 500 mph. That gave the bomber crews maybe 3 seconds to fire before the attacker flashed past. Morgan saw a fighter strike the plane off his left wing. The FW-190 tore through, cannon shells skimming across the B-17's nose. The plexiglass shattered. Both pilots were hit. The bomber nosed over, and Morgan fought the controls hard to avoid disaster. 8 B-17s and 3 B-24s went down that day. The Belle took hits from cannon fire that punched through the vertical stabilizer and peeled back aluminum skin. But Morgan kept her steady and brought her home. April 17, 1943, brought the Bremen mission. And this is where Morgan's insistence on formation flying truly paid off. Bremen was home to Focke-Wulf aircraft factories, defended like the heart of Berlin itself. Flak thickened into a black cloud that pilots swore you could almost walk on. Straight and level on the bomb run, with 88 mm shells exploding all around. No evasive action, no jinking, just trust in the crew and in the formation. When they landed, the Memphis Belle had 97 flak holes. 97. Wings, fuselage, tail, shredded. One fragment had passed through the radio compartment where the operator had been 5 seconds earlier, just as he moved to help the waist gunners. Another tore through 3 hydraulic lines, forcing Morgan to land on emergency systems. A flak fragment even pierced Bombardier Vince Evans' flight suit without touching him, and yet every man walked away. By August 17, 1943, the Belle had returned stateside, but Morgan knew the stories. Regensburg and Schweinfurt, missions that would go down as the bloodiest single day in 8th Air Force history. The plan was audacious. Hit the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg with one force, then strike the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt with another. Splitting the attack, in theory, would divide German defenses. In reality, it gave the Luftwaffe 2 chances to shred the bombers The Regensburg force lost 24 of 146 B-17s. The Schweinfurt wave lost 36 of 230. 60 bombers gone in a single afternoon. 600 men dead, missing, or captured. Some groups were nearly wiped out, unable to form even a single formation. This was the nightmare every bomber crew dreaded. And it became real that day. Morgan's crew had been flying through hell like this for months. The difference was they'd developed an almost uncanny sense of timing, knowing exactly when to zag, when to hold, somehow slipping through the kill zones that swallowed other bombers whole. The statistics from Schweinfurt proved every word Morgan had drilled into his crew about formation and discipline. Almost every bomber shot down was a straggler. Planes with engine trouble, structural damage, or crews that panicked and broke formation. The Bell survived because it did the exact opposite. Morgan's survival wasn't luck. It wasn't magic. It was a system he built mission by mission, learning from every close call, every bomber that didn't make it home. First principle: formation flying. This wasn't just for show. The B-17 was built around mutual defensive firepower. With up to 13 .50 caliber machine guns covering different sectors, packing 18 to 24 bombers into a tight combat box created overlapping fields of fire that made any attack run deadly for German fighters. Morgan flew so close to his wingmen that the tips of the planes were sometimes less than 10 feet apart. Co-pilot Jim Vinus later said Morgan would rather risk a mid-air collision than give the Luftwaffe an opening. Second principle: altitude management. Most B-17 pilots flew their assigned altitude and stayed there. Morgan constantly made micro-adjustments, climbing 50 feet here, dropping 75 there, never holding the exact same level for more than a minute or two on approach. Formation leaders hated it because it made station-keeping tricky, but it also made the Bell nearly impossible for German flak crews to bracket. Flak gunners could zero in if they predicted your course and altitude, firing one round low, one high, then putting the third through your cockpit. Morgan denied them that solution entirely. Third principle: obsessive maintenance. Most pilots landed, debriefed, and left the plane to the ground crews. Not Morgan. After every mission, he walked the Bell top to bottom, personally inspecting repairs, patches, and replacements. He crawled into the bomb bay to check the racks, climbed into the tail to examine control cables, and scrutinized every engine cowling for stress cracks or loose rivets. Crew Chief John Braun said Morgan knew that aircraft better than some mechanics. If something wasn't right, didn't look right, sound right, or feel right, the Bell didn't fly until it was fixed. Sometimes the crew sat out missions because Morgan refused to take off with an engine running rough or a hydraulic system acting up. Fourth principle: energy management in combat. When German fighters struck, most pilots instinctively tried to evade, banking, diving, climbing, anything to avoid bullets. Morgan did the opposite. He'd fly toward the attacker, holding formation, making slight adjustments to angle and speed. Every move forced the fighter pilot to constantly recalibrate their aim, buying precious seconds and saving lives. This wasn't luck. This was precision, discipline, and an almost obsessive understanding of the machine and the men who flew it. A Bf-109 diving through the formation at 400 mph had maybe 2 seconds to line up a shot. If the target suddenly wasn't quite where the fighter pilot expected, the cannon shells would miss. Morgan made himself a harder target without ever breaking formation, the one thing you were never supposed to do. He also trained his crew to communicate with absolute precision under fire. No screaming, no panic, just calm, clear calls. Fighter 12 o'clock high, 3 miles, closing fast. The gunners learned to hold their fire until the enemy was within effective range, about 400 yards for the .50 caliber. Inexperienced crews often opened up at 800 or 1,000 yards, wasting ammo and giving away their position. Morgan's men were disciplined, waiting for the perfect moment, then putting controlled bursts exactly where the fighter was going to be. Top turret gunner. Harold Lockheck even downed 3 German fighters over the course of their tour, an exceptional record for a B-17 gunner. Communication went beyond voice. The crew developed hand signals for critical situations when the intercom was overwhelmed or damaged. A tap pattern on the co-pilot's shoulder could mean, "I'm making a formation adjustment. Be ready to take over if I'm hit." Signals existed for engine issues, course corrections, and other emergencies. Even when the radios failed, critical information still flowed. Most importantly, Morgan built a culture where everyone felt responsible for each other. The ball turret gunner wasn't just defending the belly of the plane. He was watching for stragglers or damaged bombers drifting into their formation. By late April 1943, the crew had flown 24 missions. The end of their tour, 25 missions, loomed like a distant finish line, a mix of relief and psychological pressure. Crews who got close to 25 often changed how they flew. Caution crept in. Survival instinct overruled discipline. And that's when mistakes happened. Morgan had seen it before. Crews who survived 18-20 missions, only to be shot down on number 23 because they hesitated or broke formation at the wrong moment. The Belle's 25th mission came on May 17, 1943, targeting the submarine pens at Lorient, France. This should have been the moment to exhale. But confusion arose. Some earlier missions had been scrubbed due to weather, and there was debate whether they counted. Official records listed the Belle at 24 completed missions, not 25. Faced with a choice that might have broken lesser men, argue the numbers and go home, or fly again to erase doubt. Morgan and his crew did what they always did. They flew. On May 19th, they hit Kiel on Germany's Baltic coast. By most counts, Mission 26. The flak was as relentless as anything they had faced, and yet, as always, the Belle held together, carrying her crew through another day in the inferno. The Germans had reinforced Wilhelmshaven with additional 88mm batteries, specifically to protect the U-boat construction facilities. The Belle took a direct hit in the number 2 engine, which started running rough and losing oil pressure. Morgan feathered the prop and pressed on, flying the rest of the mission on 3 engines. Less power, lower altitude, far more vulnerable. But they made it home. 2 more missions followed. Wilhelmshaven again on June 11th, and Bremen on June 13th. Every time they climbed into the sky, the odds stacked higher. Each mission was another roll of the dice in a game where the house always wins, eventually. Then came June 19th, 1943. Depending on how you count scrubbed flights, it was either Mission 37 or 38. The target? Wilhelmshaven, again. By now, Morgan's crew had bombed that naval base 4 times. The German defenders knew exactly what to expect. The approach routes, the altitudes, the timings. It should have been a massacre. 70 fighters met them, and the flak was so thick it formed a black cloud of explosions. You couldn't see through it. You just flew straight into it, hoping to survive. Morgan brought the Belle into that inferno one last time, knowing this was it, the ultimate roll of the dice. Bombardier Vince Evans had to make 3 passes over the target because clouds obscured the aiming point on the first 2 runs. 3 passes meant 3 trips through a literal wall of flak, each one a test of nerves and steel. 4 minutes per pass of straight, level flying, while German gunners tracked and adjusted. On the 3rd pass, Evans finally got a clear sight. "Bombs away!" he called over the intercom. Morgan banked the Belle immediately, diving slightly to build speed and escape the flak zone as fast as 4 Wright Cyclone engines could carry them. A shell exploded close enough to knock the bomber sideways. Shrapnel tore through the left wing, puncturing fuel tanks. Morgan watched a vapor trail of fuel streaming behind them, a neon target for any fighter in the area. He transferred fuel from the damaged tank to another, silently praying it would be enough to make the North Sea crossing back to England. Flight engineer Harold Lockash calculated consumption rates in his head, calling updates every few minutes. They had enough, just barely. At 14:30, the formation crossed the English coast. Morgan could see Bassingbourn's runways in the distance. After 38 impossible missions, after every flak explosion, every fighter attack, every near-death moment, they had made it. The Belle had carried them home again, a battered but unbroken survivor of the sky. Morgan brought the Bell around for its final approach with 2,000 pounds less fuel than he'd have liked. Hydraulic pressure flashing yellow in 2 systems. Every landing on a damaged bomber carried a risk, but Morgan greased it anyway. The wheels touched down smoothly. The engines wound down, the props stopped turning, and the silence that followed was almost disorienting after months of chaos in the skies. By May 1943, American newspapers were desperate for good news from Europe. The North African campaign had gone well, but the bombing offensive over Germany was producing horrific losses and few tangible victories. Every week brought fresh stories of young airmen lost over France or Germany. The War Department needed a symbol, proof that American airmen could survive, could beat the odds. The Memphis Belle arrived at exactly the right moment. Here was a bomber and a crew that had completed their tour, all 10 men alive. Flying a photogenic aircraft with a pin-up nose art and a catchy name, the Belle was perfect for public morale. The Army Air Force's PR office saw the potential immediately. Even before Morgan's crew had finished their debriefing, plans were underway to bring the Belle home for a nationwide war bond tour. This was unusual. Most combat veterans were rotated to training duty or used to form new crews. But the Belle was too valuable as a symbol to ignore. The Bond Tour launched in July 1943 and quickly became a national sensation. Morgan and his crew visited 31 cities from New York to Los Angeles, drawing tens of thousands of people. Crowds lined city blocks just to see the Belle, touch its aluminum skin, or peer into the cockpit where Morgan had flown through 38 deadly missions. The bomber became almost a sacred artifact. Parents lifted their children to touch the fuselage, hoping that some of the Belle's luck might protect their own sons in combat. The tour raised over $50 million in war bonds, roughly $800 million today, enough to fund dozens more bombers. But the Belle's impact went far beyond money. It humanized the air war in a way no statistic, no report could. When Morgan stood on stage in Cleveland or Chicago, telling stories of flak over Bremen, of German fighters tearing through formations, of bringing his crew home time after time, people didn't just see a machine. They saw courage, discipline, and hope. The Memphis Belle became a symbol of survival, of determination, and of the human spirit prevailing against impossible odds. The Memphis Belle gave Americans a way to connect with the war in Europe. Not as numbers in a report, but as a real story. This was Bob Morgan, 24, from North Carolina, someone who could have been your neighbor, your brother, your son, and he'd survived what most men never would. Hollywood director William Wyler actually flew combat missions with Morgan's crew in early 1943 to film a documentary that would become The Memphis Belle. Wyler shot over 16,000 feet of film, riding in the ball turret and waist gun positions during 5 missions to capture authentic footage. When the documentary premiered in 1944, it played in theaters before feature films, showing Americans what bombing missions really looked like.